Hello everybody, this is Nate from the Corona team, and I'd like to welcome you to the Corona 4 3ds Max Slicer tutorial. Yep, that's what this one's going to be all about. We're going to learn how to use the slicer material to easily and effectively cut through geometry, all without using those messy and sometimes pesky booleans. So we've got our interior here. You can see it being rendered in the extended interactive viewport. And so for our first task, what we'll be doing here is we'll be cutting it open. When it comes to using the slicer material, the first thing you ought to do is you ought to bring in the base geometry that you will use to define the shape with which you'll cut. So in our case here, we're going to create a simple box, and we're just going to make sure that it's the proper size so that it encompasses the entire interior. Now, you don't need to use a box yourself. You can use any kind of an object, complex or simple, polygonal or primitive. It does not matter because the slicer material will just work on any type of geometry. Alright, okay, so now that our base geometry is in, we want to apply the slicer material to it. So let's create one by dragging it into the node editor here. And all we have to do now is we just need to apply it to our base geometry. And voila! Just like that, we're slicing through our interior here. You can now readjust the way you make the cut by moving the geometry in the scene. And as you'll see, the interactive render updates along just as you'd expect it to. So this really allows for a fun and creative workflow. Now, with the slicer material, you've got different options that you can leverage to fine-tune the slicing. So first thing, you can include or exclude scene objects from being sliced. So in our case here, what if we like the general cut we're making, but we would like to avoid cutting through the doors, the curtains, and some of the other furniture in the scene? Well, in that case, all we have to do is we need to bring up the include exclude list and just throw those objects into the exclude list. Now we've got a selection set made for the objects we want to exclude here, so we'll just select those and we'll move them into the exclude list. And there we go. We're now cutting through the interior, but we're excluding those specific objects from being cut. But wait now, there's even more to the slicer than that. A very important functionality is also the cap functionality. So right now our caps are enabled, and if we take a look at our walls, for example, you're going to be able to see that the geometry is capped off. Now, if we disable the caps from being generated by toggling the cap sliced geometry button here, well, then Corona won't be creating caps, and it'll just cut through the geometry, which will, in our instance here, result in these walls not being capped off. Additionally, if you do enable caps and you disable the override cap material option, well then, now, because we're not overriding the cap material, Corona will cap the holes using the material that is applied to the object it's cutting through. So in the instance of our walls here, the caps have the same material applied to them as the walls themselves. So if you cut through the furniture or any other kind of scene object, with the override cap material being turned off, the sliced geometry will retain its material for the caps themselves. But now, if you toggle the override cap material to on, well, that means you can plug your own custom material in that'll be applied to the caps. So if we create a new Corona physical material, and we make it this vivid blue color so that it really stands out, well then, we can plug this material into the slicer's override cap material slot. And as you can see, we're now using that newly created material for our caps. Now, before we conclude this tutorial, there's still one very important thing to discuss here, and that is the fact that now that we're slicing through our interior here, you'll notice that the lighting in the interior is getting affected. So the light sees this interior as being cut. It sees it exactly as we see it, and so the light itself comes pouring in through the cuts we've made. Now, sometimes you don't want that. You want to make the cut be visible, but you don't want it affecting the actual lighting. So to make that happen, we'll bring in a ray switcher material. This special material is used to assign different kinds of materials to the different ray types. You can use it, for example, to create materials that are invisible to the camera, or materials that are not affecting global illumination at all, and, well, all sorts of similar trickery. Okay, so now with the ray switcher material in front of us, what we'll want to do is we'll want to use it to make our slicer material not affect the lighting, but only have it affect what we see. So we'll plug the slicer material into the direct override slot here, and then we'll apply the ray switcher material onto our base geometry that we're using to make the cuts. And just by doing that, you can now see that the interior looks differently lit, because now the light in the scene doesn't actually take the slicing that we're doing into the account. The slicing/cutting now only happens visually. It does not affect the lighting at all. Alright, and with that, you now know pretty much all that there is to the slicer material. It's a really useful material, and it's also designed to be intuitive to use. Now don't forget, you can slice just about anything and everything, no matter the complexity and no matter the scenario. That's it for this one. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.